Jump into a medieval fantasy world filled with knights, kings, clerics, dragons, the English, the French, the Scottish, and more in Time of Legends, Joan of Arc. Welcome to Tantrum House Studio D. I'm Kevin Delp. Time of Legends Joan of Arc is by Mythic Games, and it is a game for 2 to 4 players. Now, this is a story-driven miniatures game that uses an action point allowance system that has both battle and scenario modes, and they sent us this copy to look at. It takes about 60 to 90 minutes to play. This game comes with a lot of content. And what you see here is only Wave 1. Wave 2 has already begun with packing, getting onto containers, and to start shipping to backers in the near future. There is a scenario book separate from the rulebook with 12 different scenarios. Each scenario shows the number of players, the difficulty level, the name and date of the scenario, and of course the components needed for setup, and any special rules as well. Many of the scenarios in this book are the French versus the English, but there's also Unholy versus Holy and others. Now, the victory conditions will be different for each scenario, but the rounds for the scenarios in this book are very similar in that there's a council phase, player turns, and then a camp phase. During the council phase, you'll be revealing activation orders that determine the number of action cubes allotted to the players that round, and the War Council cards, which provide benefits that the players can choose from that round. And then players will each take a turn using these action cubes and others that they've carried over from previous rounds if they'd like to use those as well. There are 4 different types of order cubes: activation, charge, reactivation, and interrupt. Any color cube can always be used as a gray one if you want. These determine the number of actions you can take this round. For instance, when you place an activation order in an area, then you can activate all the units in that given area. So if you want to move one into a new area, then you may want to attack with this other unit. There's melee and shooting attacks. Your cards tell you what colored dice you can roll. The defending player will also be rolling dice based on the units being attacked. There's kill that destroys a unit that has no hit points, or wounds one that does. There's disrupt that sends a unit to the infirmary. Push that pushes the enemy to an adjacent space. The defending units are trying to roll shields to prevent these attacks, but also some units can retaliate that can hurt the attacking player. You can even recruit civilians that you come across throughout the game, and they become part of your faction. But if that civilian is ever in an area without your allied units, then that civilian will leave your faction. Opponents can even spend interrupt tokens after a player has resolved an order to play an order outside a normal turn. There are lots of other types of actions in given scenarios, with character actions that can have discussions, using equipment, skill actions, and other player actions as well. And there's additional rules for gigantic creatures. After all players have taken a turn, then you'll move to the camp phase, where you'll roll the Doom die to determine the fate of the units in the infirmary. The Doom die has a death icon which destroys the unit, Disrupt stays in the infirmary, Rally which recovers the unit, and Delayed Rally, it moves to the waiting section. Play continues round after round until one side wins, or you complete the number of rounds in that given scenario, and if that happens, then the game ends in a draw. There's a player aid that is very helpful to answer questions you'll have throughout the game, especially with the different definitions of skills. When you look at all the components in Joan of Arc, with the minis, the hexes, the cards, the dice, and more, it might seem a little overwhelming, but it's nice that they have a rule book and a scenario book that divide things up nicely, and it's easy to find things that you're looking for even during a scenario. The theme is clear and comes through amazingly in the scenarios, the gameplay, the illustrations, the minis, and more. And the game is very replayable, not only with the number of scenarios given in the game, but also within a scenario, the gameplay will be different from game to game. And there's even more scenarios coming out. And there's an online editor where fans can even create scenarios. I like the depth that the factions have, that you control different cards, and you can even upgrade different characters throughout the scenario. I want to take a moment and talk about the pluses and minuses, my own opinion. The pluses, number one, are the number of scenarios that you already have in the game and the number that are going to be created. Also, the number of players that you can play this with 2 to 4. I know a lot of war games, it's only player versus player, so 1 versus 1. So going all the way up to 4 players is pretty good. You also have a nice player aid that's very helpful while you're playing the game. And then the play time. I think that's a very, very good plus. You're only playing 60 to 90 minutes. And even if one side doesn't win, there is the number of rounds for a scenario, so you know the game will end by a certain number of rounds. And one more thing, the dragon miniature in this game is super impressive. I painted this, and if you want to see me actually painting this, I did that already, and you can check out that video. I'll put a link up there in the corner so you can check out the video of me painting this. Now, some minuses for the game. The setup, I think, is the biggest minus in the game. You have to find everything for a given scenario, and it might take you a few minutes to find everything. So I think getting a way to organize this game is going to be key to make it come to the table often. So a well-organized, something to organize all this is going to be super important because there's just so many hexes. There's the cards, the miniatures, trying to find them all and put them on the board. One other minus for me are these, the miniatures fall off the bases very easily, and I guess the only way to rectify that is to actually glue them onto the base. But when we were moving them around, they fit in great. I think that's great, but when we were moving them around, they fell off the bases too easily for me. I've heard some say that the minis are too small. To me, this is not directly positive or negative. In some ways, it's a good thing because they fit on the hexes. And in some ways it's bad because you might not be able to determine certain figures, or it might be harder to find them during setup. Now, this is a miniatures war game, so if you don't enjoy those types of games, this probably is not the game for you. There's a lot of maneuvering, battling, dice rolling, trying to beat your opponent. There are some times where you are trying to complete different objectives and not battling, but the majority of what's happening in Joan of Arc is that battle. So if you are on the fence or you love it, I mean, this game is great because of the playtime. I think I've already talked about it being one of the big pluses, at 60 to 90 minutes being able to play this type of game is wonderful. And Mythic Games did an outstanding job with the production value and what they pack into this, and they can continue supporting this Time of Legends, and I've heard there's more things that they've recently announced, and you can check that out online. Well, thanks for watching this video. We would love for you to subscribe to Tantrum House, and we'll catch you next time.